Welcome to Cool Explorations. I'm your host, Tony Peters. Today we're going to be speaking to Tyler Moon, and he's going to be talking about the cardiac arrest that he had and how it changed his life and how God's been at work throughout this whole process, and also about his work with for Humanity. Welcome to Cool Explorations. I'm your host, Tony Peters. Today we have Tyler Moon on, and he's going to be telling us a little about his testimony and about his cardiac arrest that he had. It's a really interesting story, and he was on with our good friend Dudley Anderson, which is awesome. Shout out to Dudley. And why don't you start off by telling us about yourself and what you currently do?
Yeah, thanks for having me on today, Tony. So my name's Tyler Moon. I live in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and I work for a packaged food company called General Mills. So we make Cheerios and other big food brands, and I work in the logistics part of the organization. And I really, really, really love my job. I feel honored to say that I love my job. And I live with my wife here in Minneapolis, and we have a little puppy, Golden Doodle puppy. That's kind of where we spend a lot of our free time is training and playing with her.
Oh, yeah, that's really cool. Yeah, I know the cereals very, very well. I eat cereal every morning. Drives
Wonderful.
my wife hates cereal, but I am one who likes it. And also really interesting here, you have a golden doodle because we have a cavalier, which is often crossed with poodles now too.
Mhm.
And we love her very much. She's sleeping at my feet right now. So why don't you tell us a little about your testimony and what God is currently doing in your life?
For sure. So I've been very fortunate and blessed to grow up in a Christian home with Christian parents and a lot of Christian family members around me. So I grew up in the church in the Protestant kind of Lutheran faith. That's where I grew up, and from the time that I can really remember, I was always in church, doing things, whether it's volunteering or singing or being a part of different ministries at church. And I feel very fortunate for that. But when I got to be about 18 and head off to college, you have a lot of decisions you get to make on your own. And there was a bit of stumbling that occurred during that time of trying to figure out, putting my faith into action. Basically, no longer were my parents there to, impress per se, but I had to do things that were right because that's what I thought the Lord wanted me to do. So that certainly was a time. Those 4 years were really, really good for me and challenging at times to really understand, why am I doing this? Why did I do that? And really question the faith that I had. So I wouldn't say that I didn't never abandon the faith or anything like that during school, but definitely had an opportunity to really test out what I believed and learned a lot while I was at college.
Yeah, I
But
think
surely,
I
yeah,
think
you go, Tony.
that's the story for a lot of people with college. Yeah. It's a time
Mhm.
of feeling things out and, like you say, learning and figuring out where does my faith fit into the world and how do I fit into it.
For sure. Yeah, and it really was that. And I was fortunate to have great friends and people around me that still supported my faith. And God is obviously so gracious that He never abandoned me when I sometimes abandoned Him with some bad choices. So really, really, really thankful for the group that I had there. But God was really working on me, I think, preparing my heart. And after college, I went out and moved to Charleston, South Carolina. So it's a pretty big change from the Midwest. South Carolina is right on the coast. So on the ocean, beautiful sunshine, and never really snows there. And so I was out there for a job for about a year after I graduated college. And that's where I really think the Lord, captured my heart after kind of having 4 years of a lot of mistakes. When I was in Charleston, the Lord really just gave me an opportunity to really surrender to Him. And that was the first time I read the Bible in a year and really got involved in a local church there. And that's where I don't know, it's hard for me to say when I surrendered or, when I became a Christian, but that moment was really pivotal to me. And that's where I truly think I did fully surrender and say, okay, God, everything that I do, I want it to be for you. It's not for anybody else. It's not for show, but it's because I want to just please you and honor you with everything that I do. So that's really when my life really changed. And instead of being nice to people because I thought it was the right thing to do, I was nice because I was trying to love my neighbor as myself.
Mm.
And like all those little things that I'd done my whole entire life that my parents had taught me really became real once I applied the scripture to it in my own life. And so that year in Charleston is really where I think the Lord captured my heart and I really surrendered to Him fully.
Yeah, and I think that is important to note is that surrender, because oftentimes we just want control of our own lives and we want to do our own thing, and want the materialistic things of this world, uh, instead of being like, okay, God, where do you want me to be? And it's usually at that moment that things really start flowing in your
Hmm.
life, and it's
For sure.
not an easy point to get to. Because yeah,
Right.
definitely in my own life it took me a lot of years before I got to that point where I was like, okay, God, uh, I'll live for you. I'll make choices that you want me to make.
Hmm.
So um, love that in your story. You also had a cardiac arrest not that long ago. Did you want to just tell us a little bit about that and how that's kind of changed your life and how you live?
For sure. So shortly after I moved back, so I was in college for 4 years, moved away for a year to South Carolina, and then I moved back to the Minneapolis area. When I was about 23, 24 years old, I was back in Minneapolis and living a normal life, kind of with my newfound surrender to the Lord and getting involved in churches and just really, focused on Him. And when I was about 25, I signed up for a 10-mile race, which was kind of a big deal for me because I played football in college, American football, and I wasn't really a runner. And so to sign up for this 10-mile race was a big deal and something that I had been looking forward to for a while. So I signed up for the race and did all the training for it and got ready for it and was ready to go on race day. And lo and behold, near the very end of the race, like 2 miles from the finish line, I suffered a sudden cardiac arrest, which is something that we had never imagined, never pictured. It was just out of the blue, as out of the blue as you can think of it to be, because of my own athletic history and how I trained for the race and how ready I was. It's something that just really surprised us and shocked us. Um, so that was just, I mean, first off, a pretty shocking thing. But when it actually happened to me, I was running a race in the middle of the street with thousands of people around me, and I just collapsed. Right. So I just fall right on the pavement, and a bunch of people see it. And then of those people, about a dozen came to my aid, right away and started to check and be like, hey, is this guy okay? What's happening? Checking my pulse and things like that. And fortunately for me, the Lord really provided about 12 medically inclined people, whether it was doctors or
Mhm.
nurses or whomever it was, to come in and start CPR on me and keep me alive basically until an AED came and shocked my heart back into rhythm. So that's kind of the start of the story, but that's a pretty big part of my life today.
Yeah, I bet. Yeah, and I know you were probably one of the youngest people in the cardiac ward, because I heard that when I was in for my own heart procedure when I was around 18, and then later on when I was 19 again, I had another one. And so I was always the youngest person in the cardiac ward, which you can have a lot of fun with. What was that experience like for you being in the hospital?
Yeah, it certainly was a different experience. And even when they tried to place us with a doctor, they didn't know, he's not a pediatric, but he's not a geriatric. So like, where do we put this kid? So I definitely felt that as well. And we were fortunate to have really great medical care. After I was, they kept me alive and AED shocked me. I was rushed to a local hospital, really, really close to where everything happened. That's really well known for their care. And I was very fortunate to be brought there. And then we have a place called the Mayo Clinic in Minnesota. So I ended up going down there, which is a world-renowned place, and
I
got
wish I could
connected
go
with the
there.
doctors. Yes, yeah,
Yeah.
it's amazing. So feel very fortunate to be able to connect with folks and hopefully be able. We often think about bringing a light to the hospitals and different places too, because we are Christians and
Mhm.
we love people. So it's fun to be around and share God's light even in those tough times.
Yeah, for sure. Um, and I know I was thankful for the doctor that I did have because he was one of the older ones. He's retired. He's retired shortly after he did my heart procedures, but he was great and very knowledgeable. So I was very thankful for him. But I do wish we had the place like the Mayo Clinic here in Canada because that is some place we'd love to bring my son to as he has health issues as well as myself.
Mhm.
Just for that sake. But yeah, I'm glad that you had that care. It's great that God placed them in those
Mhm.
places at that time, because God just has that way of doing that, just putting the right people in the right places.
Right. And we really felt that, not only was I saved, right? I mean, that's an incredible story of God placing people around me to save me, but it really felt like throughout the whole process, He just provided people at almost like every single turn. It felt like someone was provided, and it wasn't one of those ways where you can. Some people will say, "Oh, that's kind of coincidental," or like that's interesting. But as Christians, we know that that's God's hand, His hand in everything. And so, for example, we were at a local hospital here in the Twin Cities, which is really well known. And then we were transferred down to the Mayo Clinic. And the reason that we got this Mayo Clinic connection was because I had a family member that knew a cardiologist from like 30 years in the past. And they made this connection on one of their first days in orientation or something like that. So that connection 30 years ago or 25 years ago connected me to where I was, in the hospital that day. And then later on, we had a nurse that said that she had heard about my story and was praying for me. And then the next day, she kind of heard about me in the hospital system. And so it's just like those unique things where it's like God totally is in part of all of that stuff. And it was really fun to be a part of it and to see it in real time
Yeah.
in our story.
Yeah, well, and it is an incredible feeling when you're like, okay, God, like you're at work here. This is really cool. Uh,
Hmm.
that is an incredible feeling. Sadly for me, when I had my heart procedures, I wasn't at that place in my life where I was like, okay, yeah, God's at work here. It was like, okay, people can pray for me and all this kind of stuff, but okay, it's just something to do. Like,
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, and I
so
think that's interesting. We've talked about it. I have a men's group at church that I'm a part of, and we've talked about kind of the power of being able to see God in the moment. We often look back on our lives and say, "Oh yeah, that was totally God. He was there." But the power of seeing it in the moment and then like worshiping God and thanking God and being really focused on Him in those moments is key. And I think that's the cool part about me, whether it's a family or a friend or someone that's in your life that can help point you to Christ in those situations, and you can then honor Him and worship Him in those tough times.
well, exactly. Yeah, and that's such a great message because we often forget when we're in those times of struggles. We forget that God is there. He's guiding us. He's there helping us. He's holding our hands.
Mm,
It's why I love the old poem "Footprints in the Sand." It's one of my favorites because it is so true. And looking back, I can see it happening in my own life, and obviously in yours, you can see the same thing.
for sure. Yeah.
You also did some work with Habitat for Humanity. You said back in college. What did you do there, and what kind of got you into working with them?
Yeah, so at school we had a campus ministry that sent out students over spring break to go travel and to a city and perform, a habitat build for a week. And so I signed up for that with a couple of great friends, Christian friends that invited me to join that spring break trip. So ended up taking a coach bus actually down to South Carolina, coincidentally enough, back down there before I ended up moving there. But ended up taking a bus of, I think, 30 to 40, 50 kids
Oh wow.
down to South Carolina. And we stayed in the church and we had some like daily devotionals and things like that. And then during the day, we just were serving. So we would either go and build or we would work in the Habitat for Humanity restore. So the kind of their resell retail stores here. And then we also did some random kind of cleanups and things like that we could find and do while we were down there. So it was a really cool experience and something that very thankful that I was able to do. When you're able to serve, especially alongside other brothers and sisters, and just to be able to do that together, I don't. There's probably some scripture around it, but there's just so much joy and so much camaraderie that's built when we serve together. And we know that Jesus came to serve, not to be served. So something in our spirit just really changes when we serve, and that was one of those unique opportunities that I was able to do that with some great people. And not that taking spring break vacations are bad or anything like that, because rest is really good. But it was cool to take that vacation and use it for the Lord, and not just solely focus on my rest and my time.
Yeah, and our youth group had done something. We every year we did a trip like that where there'd be some fun things we would do, but there was always some kind of volunteer thing during that trip. And then we did Operation Christmas Child every
Mhm.
Christmas to make sure that kids could get presents. I didn't have presents, but I remember a trip when we went to where was it? Omaha, Nebraska. And
Mhm.
it was a really fun youth trip. It was a big youth blast. We played paintball, which was awesome. They have an amazing paintball place there in a forest there, which was amazing. It was so much fun. And but then there was a time when we had to spend a day just doing volunteer work, and my group was cleaning up a store so that they could open it up and sell stuff for charity, as well as we were putting together packages for food for people who didn't
Mhm.
have food. And it was incredible. It was a great youth building thing and a great, like you say, camaraderie for us as
Mhm.
youth. And we were working with other youth groups from all around the country. We met a great young guy from Brazil who was we stayed in touch for a number of years afterwards. And it was awesome. So, like you say, yeah, it's an incredible feeling to just work with these different people and to serve. So
Mhm.
if anybody out there has not had that opportunity to go and just serve in some capacity and volunteer, I strongly encourage you to, because like you say, it's a wonderful experience and you can just
Mhm.
feel God working in those times. Um, what has your life been like since the cardiac arrest? How has that really changed how you've lived your life?
Mhm. Yeah, it's a great question, and it's often one that I was asked after everything happened, because I think whenever everything happened with me, the media was able to get involved, and we were thankful for that. We were able to share this really cool story about being Christians and how Jesus really saved, and we're just really impacted by that. So we enjoyed that media that came with it, be able to share the story of Jesus in my life. But with a lot of that was questions about did you see a light, or did your life completely change, or where were you to where are you now? And as I already mentioned, my testimony, I came to the Lord before everything happened. And so for me, it wasn't this big transformational experience where my heart totally changed, and kind of one of those Paul on the road to Damascus type events. But it really just made my conviction so much stronger, and really just rooted my feet so much deeper into what God wanted me to do. And it was just a really, as I mentioned earlier, a really unique way to see God move, and just really helped my faith grow and strengthen and deepen. And so I'm pretty I don't know how to say it, confident, but I just trust the Lord so much. And that event really helped me to see that and helped me to live that every single day. So from a heart standpoint, that's kind of the change that happened there. And then from a just day-to-day perspective, since my cardiac arrest, we've been able to do lots of cool things like this, podcasts or speaking or different events. That's really unique to be able to share and encourage other people facing trials in their life. And we've kind of been able to turn into a little bit of a ministry by helping, speaking at schools and speaking on podcasts, and hopefully doing some writing in the coming future as well, just to be able to encourage one another. And Hebrews 10 talks about spurring one another on to good works. So that's what we hope to do through this ministry, is to be able to spur each other on in the trials and in the triumphs in life as well, to keep continuing to help people see Christ and focus on him in everything that they do.
Yeah, and that's important to learn, is to learn that trials aren't there to knock you down and to
Mhm.
be this big destroying time in your life. They're meant to build us up, and
Mhm.
to see how we are in our faith and how can we grow in our faith. And we see that
Mhm.
repeated throughout the Bible in so many places. Um, you seem to have seen that in your life. How do you think other people could use their trials for God and to
Mhm.
just change their perspective on that?
Mhm. Yeah, that's another big question. And it's a good one that we all face, right? Whether it's loved ones passing away, or medical things in our own lives, or mental health, or anything that goes on. There are so many trials that happen in our lives, and we do see in Scripture that God does test us in different ways, and sometimes that can get blurred between a test and a trial and what that all means, and things like that. But how I view both of those and all of those is just to surrender those things to the Lord and commit yourself to him, and just to trust him in those situations. Because we read scripture and it says God tested Abraham, or whatever, and we can see that in the moment. on earth, I don't feel like I can see, okay, God, you're testing me here, versus this is just a trial that I'm facing in my life. But in either case, just to be able to commit it to the Lord and say, God, I know you can turn something good out of this. I know you can bring, gardens out of these graves. You can really just change everything that's going on in my life, because I surrender to you, and I trust you in this. So it's once again one of those times. It's kind of hard to see in the moment. God, you're here. I know you're here. I maybe just had a medical injury, but I know you're here. And that's the great part about community, and the great part about iron sharpening iron is that when we have people in our lives, if we don't quite get there on our own, someone else can point us to Christ and say, hey, God's with us and God can help us and he sees your pain. And so that's kind of what I end up sharing a lot with people is, surrendering those trials and those tests and those challenges to God, because he's the one that can help you get through it truly. And he's the one that can be glorified out of it. And in my life, at least, I feel like he's turned really, really tough situations into these beautiful, powerful, whether it's ministry events or just powerful relationships or many wonderful things that can come from it that I don't believe would happen without God. And so that's kind of the unique part about going through it with God.
Yeah, and I love that about your story, because so often people do think of these things as, I don't see God in the moment, but like you say, having that community, a support system around you of fellow Christians, they can be like, well, did you think about this? Like, did you see
Yep.
this? Like, and
Mm-hmm.
when you see the answer to prayer, especially, it's just like, wow, like God,
Mm-hmm.
okay, yeah, I get it. You're here, and I
Mm-hmm.
love that about your story. Is that you can just see that it's like God was there.
Mm-hmm.
He did all these things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's kind of it's something I've learned about a lot lately, kind of post my incident and kind of with COVID and involved in our local church, is the power of community. And we're just able to share certain things in our lives. And for me, I'm a pretty positive person. And sometimes I can be positive to the point where it's a negative thing where I just don't even acknowledge when things are tough or challenging. And I try to over positivize everything. But it's amazing in a group of believers and with God, you can just go to them and go to him and just lay it all out there and talk through those emotions and feelings. I think in those moments when we're authentic with ourselves, we're authentic with God, authentic with others, that's when we feel that the Spirit really can speak into those moments because we've opened our heart to him and he's able to work in it. And so I'd encourage folks out there, if you're listening and you have community to share, if you don't have community, get involved with your local church and find groups or however your church does their ministries. But the power of being able to share those things, pray for one another, that's really where hearts change, is amazing. And it's really been a big help for me in my life, and I hope it is for you as well.
Yeah, and a lot of people don't want to talk about it. They're like, oh,
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to acknowledge it. I just don't want to talk about it. And that's not what being in a community and having fellowship is about. As Christians, we should be sharing our trials with other people who are Christians and asking them for prayer. And you think of it as, oh, I'm bringing other people down. It's like, no, you're not. You're actually bringing people together, because
Mm-hmm.
it's a call to prayer, is what it
Mm-hmm.
is, and a call to action. And so I think that's very important to remember in there. And in the end, when people see God got you through it, it's like, wow, God got you
Mm-hmm.
through it. He can get me through this. And that's why I love testimonies so
Mm-hmm.
much and why I think they're so important. What advice would you have for those who are out there right now and they're battling these times of trial in their own life? They're really something that they think is really bringing them down.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is probably countercultural and counter what we think, but my word is surrender. And as I'm sitting here, I think oftentimes we have troubles and we want to clench our fists and we want to take control of it and fix it. And if I do this and then I do this and someone does this, then everything's going to work out great. And the reality is that when we actually open up our hands and we let go, we allow God to work, truly allow him to work, and we trust him, that's when everything's going to work out for his good and his glory. And it doesn't always mean that a loved one's going to live longer or like you're going to be healed from your sickness. That's definitely not it. But when we start open-handed, we allow God to work and he gets the glory in it. And that's, as Christians, what's most important to us is that he gets the glory. And so I'd encourage people to surrender. And with that, I know it's not, I don't want to just say, hey, surrender and then walk away, but I think it's through prayer that we really get our hearts in the right spot. So if you feel like, there's no way I can surrender this, I can't do it, I would just ask and encourage you to just start with a little prayer, just a little bit every day, and start to ask the Holy Spirit and God to just really soften your heart and open your hands. And over time, as you commit to it, I know that he can do it, and he wants to do it in your heart. So surrender through prayer and allow God to take control.
Yeah, and I love that you bring up God's glory, because definitely that is what we see throughout is God's glory shining. Thank you for sharing your story today. It's been a real pleasure. If you ever want back on, just give me a shout.
Awesome. God bless. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Cool Explorations. You've just been listening to Tyler Moon speak about the cardiac arrest that he had and his work with Habitat for Humanity, and how God has been at work throughout this entire process and throughout his entire life to bring him to where he is at right now. If you would like to reach me for any reason, you can do so at tpeters745@gmail.com.